Olá, sejam bem-vindos.
Hello, welcome everyone. I am Beatriz Bueno, and it's a great pleasure to be here, opening our second day of this event that was so expected by our community in Brazil. I'd like to remind you all that we are with our interpreters doing a simultaneous translation, so you can activate your translation into English or Portuguese. And we are also on our channels on YouTube, so you can find the links on our chat. At this time, I'd also like to thank all of our partners, sponsors, and supporters who have a huge responsibility for this event. At this time, we had a lot of figures that I'd like to share with you. The total number of registered people are 1,043. 892 got free tickets, and 151 tickets were from people who made a voluntary contribution. So in total, we have contributions of 14,322 and 90 cents in Brazilian reais, and the sponsor donors were in the total of 13,358, and a donation from sponsors were 11,500 reais, and the total in donations were 39,181 reais. And so we'd like to thank all of our supporters, sponsors, partners, and all of the people who registered from Brazil and all over the world who are watching this event. This event had all of these partners who also assembled a virtual bag that we are sharing on our chat. It's a good bag filled with novelties and coupons, discounts, so that you can enjoy everything related to the integral theory. So you can enjoy and get to know a little bit more of the initiatives that are taking place in Brazil with our partners who are supporting our MOVE conference. So right now, let's take a look at our schedule for today. I will call Vanessa Franco in a bit to do a guided meditation. And today we'll have two cases, the education case with the Peninsula Institute that's going to be presented by Heloisa Morel, and the business case from Humanizadas, which is going to be presented by Pedro Paro. And both cases are going to have comments from Esbjörn-Hargens and Marcelo Cardoso, and then we will have a panel with Sean and Diane Hamilton. And we will close our day and this wonderful conference with Marcelo Cardoso and myself. So I'd like to call Vanessa Franco so that she can present the meditation that she prepared for today. Vanessa, are you there? Yes, I'm here. Good evening. Good evening, Bia. Good evening, everyone. Everyone here watching us. So we have this mission of just like yesterday, being here with our hearts and minds and open spirit so that we can do this first moment of a guided meditation, which is a context in which we can bring our body together to this field so that we can warm up together in the same context. But I'd just like to have a first moment here before we share the video. I'd like to bring a testimony here. Yesterday, I started by talking about how thankful I was for the invitation, but I'd also like to extend this opportunity for a talk, because yesterday we mobilized so much to bring this awareness that these 10 years of our Integral Institute in Brazil, this moment for celebration, mobilizes us to extend the field of this critical mass. And so I'd like to bring a little bit more substance for the thanks that I'd like to give to the Institute in my process as a psychologist And truly, the Institute has people involved, especially Lilian, Adriana, Paulo Passini. They were at the same time that I was, Paulo in particular, and they had to do with my calling, because I had a dream with Ken Wilber. We cannot meet him in person, but sometimes he shows up in a dream. And the dream that I had was very interesting. That was a dream in which I was in a football stadium, soccer stadium in Brazil, like Maracanã in Rio. It was very big and very full of people. And Ken Wilber was giving a lecture. And then he went down from the stage and he got close to me and he said in my ears, "It's no use to have a prana if there's no group." And then the dream ended and I woke up with this dream in a time that was very important in my life, because I had a trend toward the upper quadrants of the individual, and I tend to be more in subjective, and I felt that I needed to leave these quadrants and visit the lower quadrants that have to do with collective. And so I did the movement, and that's when Ken Wilber gave his lecture, the webinar about love in our Brazilian flag for us. And I felt that I had to give this step forward, and the Institute welcomed me. So if yesterday I began by saying that I came to thank the Institute for the invitation, today I offer a present, a gift. We did this video in 6 hands and 3 hearts, me and other people who work with me in Self-Integral. And we did, during long nights, we created the music, the soundtrack of yesterday, and just like today, and the animation that we used, we were very careful with that so that it had to do with the story of the Institute, with everyone involved, and with a high standard that it deserved. So in this place of offering a gift, that's where I want to bring you this mobilization, that truly the Institute is open and opportunities are already taking place for those who want to give this step forward. And when we give a gift, we want to provide a nutrition to people. So I want to provide nutrition to the entire community and the Institute and the minds and the spirits of everyone here, so that we can get to this place that Ken Wilber mobilizes in us, this place of greatness that we have to offer to the planet. So may it be so. I ask you to please be at your comfortable place, in a chair, in an armchair, and please take a few deep breaths. For those of you who need subtitles, we have English subtitles on the video, but those of you who rather get your eyes closed and just follow the sound and the soundtrack and the voice, you can just enjoy as well. So have a wonderful journey, and may we move on this next day, hopeful of what comes next. That's what I had to say. Thank you very much. There are English subtitles on the video.
Nas 2 últimas décadas, uma estrutura teórica radicalmente nova para organizar o mundo e suas atividades começou a alcançar proeminência e reconhecimento por toda parte. Assim inaugura Ken Wilber a nota ao leitor em espiritualidade integral. Conhecida como abordagem integral ou uma teoria de tudo. Essa meta-estrutura, que inclui em 5 princípios os fundamentos-chave que compõem a evolução da vida, se revelou como uma meta-teoria, que é usada em todas as áreas, do mundo dos negócios à medicina, da psicologia ao direito, da política à sustentabilidade, da arte à educação. Como um sistema operacional integral, Esse mapa do desenvolvimento favorece e possibilita que todos os domínios da nossa vida se intercomuniquem e se relacionem integradamente rumo à evolução do ser, em unidade com tudo. Sob a influência de todos os quadrantes e todos os níveis, a abordagem integral vem se revelando a todos e se anunciando nesse novo milênio que acontece agora, bem debaixo dos nossos olhos. Nesse dia que conclui nossas celebrações, traz com você agora toda a vivacidade e a dinamização que esse evento proporcionou com os encontros de ontem, recordando todos os que participaram, o grande momento com Ken e tudo aquilo que mais te tocou, te inspirou e te mobilizou para caminhar adiante. E por uns instantes, traga o mapa integral à sua mente. Uma cruz ao centro, delimitando que a vida acontece em 4 quadrantes: o dentro, o fora, o individual e o coletivo, sendo entrecruzada por múltiplas linhas de desenvolvimento que se regulam para cima e para baixo em 7 possíveis níveis ou estágios evolutivos, onde tudo acontece em diferentes estados de consciência, manifestados pelos diversos tipos de personalidades. Uma bússola que dá um norte, oferecendo uma visão ampliadora para navegar nesse terreno da realidade, em um mapa preciso e detalhado do ser humano, que nos ajuda a entender o nosso próprio desenvolvimento, transformando, transcendendo e incluindo a cada nível e nos auxiliando a seguir em frente, de maneira abrangente, consciente e saudável. Vai visualizando esse mapa integral multidimensionalmente vivo e atuante em sua vida. Contornando teu corpo, expandindo a tua mente, reverberando em suas relações consigo mesmo, com o outro e com a comunidade mais ampla. Permita que a profundidade vertical dessa bússola, que se estende para cima e para baixo, para dentro e para fora, reverbere em todas as direções, te impulsionando ao seu próximo passo evolutivo. Consagra, através desse momento celebrativo dos 10 anos de Instituto Integral Brasil, para onde essa bússola aponta para você desbravar, nesse novo ciclo que inicia. Contando com o Instituto como um espaço colaborativo para as iniciativas vindouras, carregando sempre o propósito de, com a visão de uma vida integral, elevar a nossa bandeira à sua expressão original, de um inclusivo amor, de uma ordem integral e de um constante tetraemergente progresso. E tal como esse contador de histórias cósmicas um dia nos contou em uma teoria de tudo, no final, a visão integral servindo ao seu propósito é finalmente ofuscada pelo esplendor de um espírito que é óbvio demais para ser visto e está próximo demais para ser tocado. A busca integral finalmente chega ao fim, ao abandonar a sua procura para dissolver-se numa liberdade radical e numa plenitude consumada. Renunciamos a uma teoria de tudo para simplesmente ser tudo, em comunhão com o todo, em sua consciência infinita que sustenta o cosmos delicadamente nas mãos. E então, o verdadeiro mistério se revela. A face do Espírito sorri secretamente. O sol brilha em nosso próprio coração. E a terra se torna o nosso próprio corpo. As galáxias correm pelas nossas veias, enquanto as estrelas iluminam os neurônios da nossa noite. E nunca mais buscaremos por qualquer teoria que não seja verdadeiramente a nossa própria face original.
Obrigada, Vanessa.
Thank you, Vanessa. Well, to continue our day, we will now begin with our cases. And we will begin with the education case from Instituto Península. So I'd like to invite Heloisa Morel, who is going to introduce this case to us. Hi, how are you, Heloisa?
Muito bem, Heloisa. A Heloisa, que é diretora executiva.
Heloisa is the executive director of the Peninsula Institute, who's experienced in business management, marketing, and she also studies the integral theory. So, Heloisa, I'd like you to begin your presentation. Welcome. You have the floor.
Welcome, Heloisa, and the space is yours. So I'm going to share. I would like to appreciate and thank Marcelo. I feel at home. A lot of names that I know from the CMI certification. But what I would like to tell you is how Institute Peninsula has been journeying, transforming institute and transforming our contribution from in education through integral education. Institute Peninsula is completing 10 years this year. It's from a family that is from Abilio Diniz, and from his the day is born, it's connected with improving public education here in Brazil, what it's huge. And our strategic choice is about transforming professors, teachers, because they are the catalyzers of the transformation in the education. And those, we have 2 million teachers in Brazil, and they touch the lives of 50 million children in Brazil, and we want to transform their lives. Our mission is to transform Brazil through education. If we develop people, people will develop the country. So that's why we are choosing people and choosing exactly teachers. And how integral comes to this conversation. We know that each one of us are very plural. We are not one piece, one dimension. So bringing forward this vision, this integral vision,
Elo, acho que está tendo probleminha de internet. Eu posso entrar aqui e falar pouquinho enquanto ela volta.
So I can talk a little bit about this experience because we were with Elo in this project. So it was very special. Sean was also in the project. Carla, that is translated, was also in the project, and Mari was also part of it. So the question was, what is integral education and integral approach? So we had this broad approach to it. We studied 50 approaches to the post-formal education. And after looking at this post-formal education, we investigated 20 prototypes. There's this book in English from an Australian person that brings this post-formal education approach for those that are in education is worth reading. And Sean also brought Zach, that it's from Harvard Education University, also looking for Brazilian educators, Paulo Freire, and several Brazilian authors also. And then we build a framework that I think Elo is going to show. It's a frame that considers the integral approach is an integral approach framework. And I was telling a little bit about the story of the project. Okay, so that's the reality of the teachers in the pandemic. Oh, you did it on purpose just to show how the teacher had to deal with the reality. No, but the light came out here in my house. So I was telling a little bit when we started. So what we were seeing a complex word, uncertainty, in Peninsula Institute from the family believes that as whole as developed, we are more prepared to handle those challenges and those problems that we see in society. They are the tip of the iceberg. They are more deep within the individual, the system, the group. And when we look at education, we like the sentence that Ken Robertson says that all the educational systems, they have a hierarchy of what is important. So you start with math, then we study languages, and then you go to humanities, and then to go to arts. But it seems like you're only looking at the head of the person and the left part of the brain. So you're not looking at the whole person. The education works to educate the cognitive aspect of the individual, and it promotes a big dissociation of the individual. So what we started to do in the Peninsula Institute, when you develop the human being as a whole, you can offer and can bring out the best of the human being, and Marcelo and Sean and she and friends from this integral net was with us, just translating all this, the research, the information, and we were very informed by Ken Wilber and how to translate that into education. It was a long path and it was very deep, because as you prepare something that is integral, you're part of the process. You're also developing yourself. But what we are trying is to develop for teachers and students in multiple dimensions that we call body, mind, emotion, and purpose. And for us, we choose spirituality not to activate some religion triggers. We name it as purpose. meaning. So that's how we offer that this transcendence perspective of development. So we have 2.2 million teachers here in Brazil, and it's very interesting to say that when we started this journey with She, it was around in 2017, we knew of this complexity. And when we articulate with the government, the public system, it's not cognitive, it's not the practice, how you teach math or how you teach Portuguese. Everybody agree with us, but okay, that's true, but this comes later, this comes later. And then pandemic came, and a lot of issues that were there, the health, the mental health, this connection of the human being, students and teachers, the pandemic made it evident, but it also in the public sector and also in the teachers, it increased the consciousness that it's important to integrate the individual. Because of this integration, he will be able to handle his work. In the private sector, you have the same, you're here to work, your problem to stay outside. So it's the same. It's the same for the teacher, but you have something that it's more difficult because in order to work, the teacher holds the space for 50 children.
Eita, lá vamos nós. Tá chovendo aqui em São Paulo, deve ter caído a internet da
It's raining really hard here in São Paulo, so I guess Elo internet. I think this aspect that Eloy is bringing forward, it's very important. The challenge of education, the challenge 2 million teachers, 40 million children. The focus in the teacher, you focus in the transactional aspect, the technical aspect, and you don't have this way of seeing the human being, the person. When you talk about levels of consciousness, what it was interesting when we were working.
Conta a história, Lô.
I'm telling the story, though. It's gonna be with a lot of emotion. You're doing on purpose in order for us to experience what the student experienced. Okay, so I'm going to try it again. So I'm trying to, can you guys hear me? Yep.
Bom, então, eu estava falando
So I was saying about this complexity, about the situation of education and the teachers and the challenge that the pandemic brought, but we had some second effects of the pandemic. There was conscious that it's necessary to integrate this teacher. Before the pandemic, we were working and considering that Brazil is such a huge country, it's almost a continent, it's very distributed. We wanted to make a solution that could contribute with the development of the teachers that would be accessible. So how we translate that in a concept and a framework for education. From this framework, we develop a solution that is called Vivitive. It's a word that it was invented by a Brazilian author, that it's a leaf growing up. So Guimarães Rosa came with the word that it's growing and developing. So it's a digital solution in order to be able to escalate. It should be for all, so it's free and it's easy to access. It was built in a co-creation with teachers, and we had teachers in the whole Brazil. So it's a co-creation from the teachers for the teachers, and the focus was in the practices and to build engagement and continuously build this dialogue with the teachers and put it in practice. The first version was developed for one of the directors of Diane together with she and with professors, and then Maribem is amplifying the solution in Brazil. So we started slow with a prototyping. In 2018, we learned with the prototype, learn with the digital world. It's important to just learn and adjust. So this dialogue with the teachers has been very important to us. And this platform has this idea to develop the teachers in the 4 dimensions. And listening to Ken yesterday, but also experience our centering, our frame, it is in the 4 dimensions. It considers individual and collective, interior and exterior. So, and then you have this mandala that in the aspects that are individual interior, you have experience, the individual experience, how he sees themselves. Then we have the aspects of the relationships, the behaviors of the teachers, the relationships and the connections that teacher establishes, and then the systems and the context and all the variables that are part of the process of learning. So from this first layer, we have the dimensions of body, mind, emotion, and purpose in each one of the quadrants. And then we have the lines that moves from meaning, and the meaning of this work that the teacher chose and still chooses. And then it moves the importance of the connections, the public system, and the multiple perspectives, the connection and the openness that you have in the relations. So this frame, this mandala that was was on a concept that we developed in our journey and in connection also with she. And then we started to develop offers for the public system here in Brazil. And with our digital solution, we started with VVC. We finished the first years with 1,000 teachers engaged. And in November 21, we have almost 100,000 teachers engaged. We are in almost all the states in Brazil. And during the pandemic, what happened was that the teachers started to ask, and then the public system made the VVC platform the main support system for the teachers to dialogue and to experience and develop those dimensions more individual and more the development that develops this individual. And then with the pandemic, we have the state, the hiring, the state hired the platform to be the main source or the main provider of transformation and support for the teachers during the pandemic. And Institute Peninsula has also doing a program for teachers that are going to form and to build capacities within the systems for others to build capacities within the system. So we have also journeys to generate autonomy for the public systems. So VVC is a seed that has a purpose in the system to transform the public systems within the states, within the cities, within the schools, in a enabling to deal with the complexity that is present, with the relationships that are present, with the results of trust that are present, and to allow the full potential of the students to be assessed. So I think that is my main message. I was interrupted for the rain a couple of times, but I think that's the main aspect that I would dialogue. So this project is dear to our heart, so it's amazing to see the results. I would like to invite Sean to be with us also. Sean is going to be here in English. He's here with us.
Sean, eu queria te convidar primeiro para se apresentar rapidamente.
Sean, I would like you to introduce yourself, and having listened to Elo, just a comment. I don't know if you had seen from we came the ideas and had seen the impact, have seen 1,000 teachers being affected. How do you feel it? Introduce yourself and in connection with education, integrity education.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marcelo. It's great to be here with all of you tonight. I was with you yesterday with Ken and Bence and Jeff and everyone. So it's a great event, you know, having worked with Marcelo for over a decade and participated in the beginning of the Integral Institute. It's such an exciting celebration to say we've been here for 10 years and we have many good things to show for. And one of those things is Hilo and the project that she just presented. And we'll be hearing from Pedro also with another exciting project in just a little bit. Yeah, I have to say, introduce myself. So my name is Sean and I am from the United States. I live in Maine. I used to live in California, but we moved recently. So now I'm on the East Coast. And I've been coming down to Brazil. I've been able to meet many of you and work with many of you for many years. Marcelo and I participate with the leadership program that the Institute provides. And yeah, I've been involved with integral education from the very beginning and helped edit a book by the same title in 2010, and have developed many integral education programs, certificates and university programs and leadership programs. And I'm currently the Dean of Integral Education at a graduate school in California that I work with virtually because I'm in Maine. And I'm helping to develop a whole university based on integral education principles. So maybe that's enough for my background, because I think many of you have met me and we've been connected. So Hilo, so great to see you and congratulations. I have to say, this project is one of the most successful integral education projects ever. It is like unbelievable. It is so cool. It's just been so successful. And I'm so happy for you and the team at Peninsula. And, you know, there's so many good things to say about it. I'll highlight a few, and then Marcelo, you can add. First is you involved a multi-year, multi-stakeholder process to develop the model and the process. So you took the time to do the research and to involve many people to create the model that you now use. And I think the value of that is demonstrated by how successful it's been. Like, so it's great that the process you used to do that. And I feel very honored that I and Marcelo and Carla and others were part of that process. So it means a lot to me to be able to say I helped create this project because it's so successful and amazing. The other thing is it's won a lot of recognition, right? So you presented at South by Southwest back in 2019. You've gotten awards, so the world is noticing, the world is saying, hey, what are they doing over there in Brazil? That seems like a pretty cool project. Let's learn more about it. So I'm so glad that the world is taking notice of the unique approach you've taken and the success that you're having. There are a number of things that I think really stand out with this application. One, and I did not know this, I was an expert in integral education and was brought into the project because of that expertise. But I did not know that Brazil has its own unique history of integral education that goes back to 1932, before Ken Wilber was even born. So it's so cool that Brazil has its own unique tradition of thinking about education in a holistic and integrative way that provided a foundation for you and your team at Institute Peninsula to build on that and to create a unique expression of integral education in Brazil. So I just think that is really amazing. And then you've developed your own unique 4-quadrant model, the body, emotions, mind, and purpose, right? And so this is a model that can be used in many contexts, but it was developed as a version of the quadrants that really works with the Brazilian spirit, right? You're very relational, so the emotional piece is important. You're very spiritual, so the purpose piece is very important. And even in a public education context where maybe spirituality is, something to be avoided, you've been able to find a way to bring it in through purpose and allowing people to connect with that larger sense of meaning making. So I think it's a really neat example of how people can use the 4 quadrants, and if they take the time to deconstruct it and then rebuild it the way we did through those first workshops, you can develop a version of the quadrants that fits the local conditions, that fits the unique situation that you're using them for. You don't just have to use the quadrants as Wilber gives them. You can use that as a starting point, and then you can decide what's the version of this that works best for our situation. And so you've done that very nicely. The program really kind of started, back in 2017, so it's, 5 years of building momentum, and it feels like you're just beginning, right? Things are just starting to take off. So this is really, really amazing. And, the goal was to touch 150,000 teachers, and you're already within a few years of the platform being launched at 100, right? And there's no doubt that within the next 2 years, you're going to hit that mark and go beyond. And Brazil can really benefit from this. One of the things that is so unique about your case study is how you've been able to scale an integral model in education across an entire nation in a public sector, right? This is unheard of. I'm not aware of any other example in any other industry, right? Medicine, sustainability, and so forth. So this is a really unique example for the whole world. And in this way, I think you should be very proud that this is one of the best examples of integral applied, making important changes on the ground in people's lives than any other example I'm aware of. I cannot think of another example that is as exciting and as impressive as this one, that has scaled an integral approach to so many people so quickly, right? So I think there's a lot that the rest of the world can learn who are interested in applying integral to their situations. They can learn a lot from what you've done here. And I don't know if you know, Hilo, but I ended up writing an academic case study of your project that I submitted to an academic journal that's being published in the next few months. And that's one effort I'm making to help bring more attention to what you're doing, because I think more people need to know about it. So Integral Institute Brazil should be very proud that one of their own has been able to be so successful with their use of integral. And then the other thing I will say, and then I'll hand it over to Marcelo, is the unique thing happening here is you have taken the teacher training as the intervention, right? A lot of approaches to integral education focus on the students, and there's good reasons to focus on the students because, you know, that's the aim of education. But one of the things you realized early on in the analysis of what might be done is that if the teachers are not integral, it's hard for the students to become integral, right? And so by helping the teachers become integral human beings and going through the 16 paths, you know, and developing the 4 paths and the 16 competencies, they really begin to activate their own integral experience as a human being. And then they can bring that into the classroom, into the work they do, and they can be a strange attractor to bring out the integral in the students they work with, right? So I think this is another unique aspect that more approaches to integral education would benefit by focusing on the teacher. And you guys have found a very powerful way to do that. So congratulations, big Brazilian hugs and kisses to you and your team. I'm so proud of you and so excited to see what comes next.
Muito legal, Sean. Elo, eu queria, tem todas essas coisas.
Sean, there's a lot here, but I would like to bring forward 2 perspectives, and I would like you to tell a little bit how you dealt with one is the pandemic, but Sean said about the integral education, and this aspect of integral education is very present in Brazil for a long time. So Paulo Freire is one of the main authors in Brazil talking about integral education, but the integral approach for education talks about a lot of the quadrants. They are more collective, they include, but they don't take enough time and enough care to look the aspects of the upper quadrants. The lower quadrants are more included in the Brazilian approach to integral. But we also talk a little bit of the levels of consciousness. We are talking about 2 million people, and the gravity center probably is number. There's a logic to enhance mathematics and Portuguese that is very orange, and if that was before our current president, but a lot of leadership in education and connected with education were more green. So the idea suffered a lot of resistance because we had all those centers of gravity in the different actors of the system. So how you dealt with it when you bring forward and how you dealt with those challenges. I think there are 2 aspects that I would like to mention. There is a journey that was our journey as an institution. So to develop a solution for the teachers had allowed for the team in the Institute Peninsula to our individuals are in this journey, in the vertical development journey, and both individuals and both the organization. So what we're doing for the outside, we're doing for the inside. But when we connected with the system, Brazil is in the crisis of learning that is so big. The challenges of the secretaries of education are so huge that it's natural of that the secretaries of education in the state prioritize some aspects. So when the students are not learning, so before we develop the teacher, we have to, the public system tend to focus on the aspects more objective. So the challenge, but that was the shift that the pandemic brings. In complexity, there's not this first I'll do this and then I'll do that. You have to develop the teacher in the technicalities, but also in those multiple dimensions, because the student is in the multiple dimensions. So you're not teaching math if the student is hungry. It doesn't have food in his plate. So all those multiple perspectives are present. So when you talk about legacy in a system that has so much hurt, so much pain, we would like to be a seed of understanding that we need to look for students and teachers as a complete human beings. Before being a professional, the teacher is a human being. And when you brought the quadrants, it was knowledge in education, the importance of the community. But even this was lost because the teachers in the public schools, sometimes they work in 3-4 schools. So they don't have a community, a sense of community. And I think the integral in the pandemic brought this sense of urgency, this sense of it's important to connect because the challenges are bigger. So this union of teachers, of government, around the challenge of the students is more visible. And then the upper levels, how the teacher behaves, how he handles the differences, and how the professor, the teacher, himself, herself. And even when he was conscious that he had to look at himself, the system would say, this is your problem, you solve in therapy. The issue here is mathematics. So to hold us all this richness, all those multiple perspectives, and now it's okay to talk about it. There's more openness to dialogue about all those multiple issues. And seeing it as an evolution, it's not going to be ready, not everybody is going to be engaged. It's not a solution that it's for everybody, like, oh, now it's the solution, but it was an invitation and each one engages in their own time. It's going to be amazing. We have 6 minutes, and yesterday was very deep for me when Bence brought forward this aspect of the heart center, and the heart center be connected with a bigger field. And I would like, you asked me to be a part of a live in the beginning of the pandemic. I had many teachers from the whole country, and I got really moved because of his visit, there were saying beautiful comments in the countryside of Amazon, in the northeast of Brazil, teachers with all the difficulties that's what is very fundamental, that even in the hardship, when you give meaning, when you give purpose, disconnect people. So even we have this huge challenge, the hunger. They don't only have food when they go to school, but when we treat the teacher and remind him of the feeling of the connection and education. So I would like to ask Sean to bring forward this openness of heart and more affection aspect. And if you have some story of connection, of purpose, how has this purpose have been moved from a place of open heart, Sean, and then move to Elo.
You're on mute, Sean.
on your mute.
Oh, Marcelo, can you repeat the invitation around heart and purpose?
Yeah, I'm gonna do it in English.
Yeah.
What I just said is that we are talking about frameworks and X and Z, but at the end of the day, there is a human being and,
Yeah.
and a heart connection, and from the heart being open, just connecting with this larger field of people with being educated through teachers all over the world, and particularly in Brazil with the challenges. So I was just saying that when we create context and meaning, people embrace it. If you could share your own experience from your heart center in being involved in education, and then asking Elo to finish up around the same times.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, the integral model is a very powerful map of reality. But for me, what's so valuable about that is it allows me to be directly in relationship and have more intimacy with reality. And so we take this abstract model of all these quadrants, levels, lines, and all of this, and it could be used to be at a distance from reality. But for me, it pulls me into reality. It pulls me closer to reality. And in the context of education, I feel it's so powerful because the model is about preserving the wholeness of the person, right, in their full integral expression. And when teachers are connected to their integral nature, and they're able to connect to the wholeness of the students that they are working with, that really is about the heart connection. So it's about using the integral model to include all these different elements so that all the pieces are there, all the different aspects of ourself are included, so that all of me can be in relationship to all of you. And all of you can teach all of me, and all of me can teach all of you. We don't want teachers just using their head to teach the head of the students. We want the head and the heart and the body and the emotions. We want all of that to be the place from which we teach and the place from which we learn. So this is what really touches me about the model that Hilo and her team has developed, because I believe it supports this whole human contact, all of me connecting with all of you, and both of us learning and teaching together. And the integral model supports us to do that in a very powerful way.
Marcelo, enquanto o Sean falava em você, eu lembrei de uma história que
Sean and you said, we're talking, reminding me of a story. One of the directors of the Institute Peninsula, she went with the family for the countryside, and in the building, the daughter of the building are very friends. They're the daughter of the guy that works in the building. So this little girl that was 8 years old would send audios because she couldn't write. So she couldn't write, and she would send audios. When are we going to play? When are we going to play? And then she came back to Rio, and this little girl was sitting in the stairs of the building, and her apartment is in the ground floor, and she was saying, "I'm using your internet." And she said, "Oh, I think she was playing, I'm using your internet, but who are you talking to?" "I'm talking with my teacher. My teacher is teaching me to write and to read." So during the pandemic, a lot of children did not have access to school, to education, with infrastructure that is basic, but that teacher did not give up and was teaching this little girl to write and to read at 9 o'clock. And then the Bia that worked with us was showing that communication between the little girl and her daughter. And then it started to have text, because this, and not only audios, because text was available, because she learned how to write. So how this moves me, I think it moves me in a sense that connects my purpose and the purpose of Institute Peninsula when you give empowerment to the teacher, but not to one teacher, to the 2.2 million teachers of the power that they have to transform. And not only with tools that are technical, but tools that are emotional, that are connection. And in me personally, the journey, the integral journey, it's to connect with my different roles and my different intelligence to use this force to transform education here in Brazil, because I do believe that education is the main tool to transform Brazil. And Brazil, being a country with such a huge differences, it's a tool that can allow each children in the public school to transform their own context. For me, education, integral education just makes my purpose to be meaningful and work. So thank you, Willow. My very best to you, my very best. And it's only starting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Elo. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Sean. I'm going to invite Pedro Paro now. Pedro, are you there?
Boa noite, estou aqui. Boa noite, prazer a todos e a todas que estão nos assistindo. Bem emocionante essas falas finais aqui, tocaram bastante.
Sim, muito emocionante, né? Tá tudo muito lindo. Pedro, então, você que é CEO e fundador
Pedro, you are the chair of Humanizadas. We're very curious to see what you have to say. You can begin your presentation. Thank you, Bia. Well, first of all, thank you, Bia, Brasil Integral Institute Brazil. Thank you very much for the invitation for me. It's a great honor to be here with you. I'd also like to thank everybody from the organization of the event. I prepared a few slides to tell a bit of the story of Humanizadas and to tell you how the integral thinking influences our path. So I'm going to share a few slides with you. Humanizadas is a startup on data science. We are a spin-off from the University of São Paulo. It's a BRE company through and through. And so we will complete 2 years, the start of the startup here in January. And we want to tell you how the integral thinking influenced our company. So I'd like to bring a reflection here. So why do we do what we do? And there are insights that came from exercise in the meta-integral certification. I'm a student from the class number 4. Many people who are watching us know I miss you guys. And in our exercises, today I'm currently the founder and CEO of Humanizadas, and in the exercises of the certification, reflecting about my trajectory, about my origin, I came from Franca, the countryside of São Paulo state in Brazil. It's the city known as the capital of the shoe, and my grandfather, he already passed away. He was a shoemaker, and his dream was to start and create a store that sold food. And in Simai, I reflected about my origin, and I saw how much my grandfather as a shoemaker suffered. He was an alcoholic, my grandfather. My father works in the banking business. He's also an alcoholic. And I realized how much the work since my childhood, since my adolescence is, it bothers me in the way we do business and in our relations in the work. I don't know if any of you know my hometown. The shoemakers, they go and they ride their bikes through the town. And I don't remember one day in which my grandfather was sick and he did not go to work. I have no memory of that. My grandfather always went to work in the rain, in the sunshine. He went to work so that he could ensure the support of our family. And looking back at his story and my dad working in the banking business, there was a lot of stress in his work. He was always very tired. And I questioned myself if the companies don't have a way, a different way of doing business from childhood. And I keep thinking about that, and I try to do that. And I think not only in terms of my routine, I'm very proud actually now that I can have breakfast with my daughter, and I can have dinner with my daughter, and I can take her to school and pick her up. I take all of this to my life, to my relations with other people. I try to think about the story of my grandfather and my family. And a great deal of the work of Humanizadas, of this startup that I founded, began in the work of Professor Raynsford. It's a professor and a founder of conscious capitalism movement in Brazil. And in 2017, during the Lava Jato operation, the car wash operation, which was anti-corruption, I had studied in the University of Sao Paulo, and I was bothered with the cases of corruption that came out in the Lava Jato operation. And I wrote a research question, is there, that had to do with, are these the companies, are they more ethical? What are they in Brazil? And I researched the companies in Brazil, and a great deal of that I report in a book called Conscious Entrepreneurship in Brazil. And along this journey, I got to know Integral Institute in 2018, 2019, by means of Cato. Cato participated in CME first in the certification, and then I also participated in that in the Cato 2 years before. I already followed the Integral Institute, the Evolution Institute, and all the other movements that had to do with this thing. And together with Terço Barelli, Tess and I joked around that we were developing here in Humanizadas the conscious, and maybe the core of Humanizadas is in this phrase, a conscious with a science. It's the praline words in Portuguese. It would be an awareness with science, or consciousness with science. And science is the knowledge of oneself, of the other, and of reality. And science is the study of reality. The consciousness is the study that I just mentioned, and the science and study of reality. So I see this interdependence between the concepts of consciousness and science. And I like to say that conscience is the knowledge of science, and science is the study of the reality, as I used to say. And when we think about the study of the reality and the consciousness of ourselves, and the consciousness of the others and of the environment in which we live, it's important to remember that we as human beings, we are intersubjective beings. When we think about the prehistoric times, when we used to draw on caves, we were drawing the others, and based on the drawing of the other, we got to know ourselves. And so we are intersubjective beings. Based on our look of other people, we get to know ourselves. Here we have a few images from Piauí state in Brazil of archaeological work in the Serra da Capivara and Riacho Palmeira in the state of Brazil of more than 30,000 years ago. So while looking at the other, we can look at ourselves. And I realized that at this time in the world in which we live, we need to go back to this look, really. And we need to look at other people, but we also need to look at our own planet, at our environment, in the society and other relations that we have. Here to bring you a picture of Mato Grosso State, 1986. And I'm going to advance here this picture to 2016. And when we advance and we go forward in these 30 years of the development of the state, we can realize how much we interfered with the environment. This is a very agricultural state in Brazil, and it's important to recognize and acknowledge ourselves. So this picture, to me, it reveals not only how badly we treated the environment and the degradation of the planet, but it also reveals the degradation of ourselves, of our values, of our essence, our greed, our lack of empathy, in relation to the problems that we're going through and in terms of our reality, and the actions that we generate in the world, they're nothing more than a reflection of what we are in our behaviors. When we look at the humanity and the planet, they are under risk. There are numbers that we have here. We are consuming 1.7 planets Earth. We are consuming in the rhythm that planet Earth cannot regenerate. If there were a consumption like the Americans and the United States, this number would go to 5 planet Earths. And we undergo a social crisis. Number 1 and 4, for me, they help express the crisis that we're going through. In Brazil, 1 every 4 children have food safety of having 3 meals a day. So 3 out of 4 children do not have the right of having 3 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And at the same time, 1%, the 1% wealthiest of the country concentrate 44% of the total wealth of the country. There's a study by the University Unicamp in Brazil showing that there are 6 white men in Brazil that have more than 44% of the wealth of Brazil, this figure that he just mentioned. And when we talk about the 2030 agenda for the sustainability in the country, the governance indicates that we are 43 years lagging, and currently in our current rhythm, we were going to reach this 2030, we're going to reach this agenda in 2073. So this is a reflection of a few of the reflections of our actions with ourselves, with other people, and with the society, and with the planet in a general way. And here in Humanizadas, we talk about developing consciousness, and we say that we are defending the SDG 0, the Sustainable Development Goal number 0, which is to elevate the consciousness so that we can transform the way with which we are in relationship with ourselves, with others, with the environment around us. We believe that if we don't transform the operating system of the organizations and of the society, we're going to keep having the same results. There's a great deal of reflection that we can think about in terms of the role of the institutions and of the businesses. Here we have a research from the Instituto Salzman from May 2021 showing that 61% of Brazilians trust only in the companies. The average Brazilian person does not trust the government. He does not trust the media, and he has a level of trust that's neutral in terms of the NGOs, and an average Brazilian trusts only companies, corporations. 9 out of 10 Brazilians require or would like or would expect CEOs to publicly manifest their opinions about social issues like inequality, the pandemic, the automation of the work. And 7 out of 10 Brazilians expect organizations to interfere when the government cannot solve social problems. And to bring you data from a research with a lot of people in Brazil. So what's the role of Humanizadas? What do we want to do? We want to do consciousness and with science, and we want to move toward a new economy using data intelligence, a new standard of behavior. So here we have examples from a few institutions that use Humanizadas. This year, more than 300 institutions in Brazil used products from our Humanizadas institution, and doing sense making and a mapping of their systems with multiple stakeholders. And this year we are hearing from more than 50,000 people in Brazil, partners, collaborators, and the society in a general way, even families, and bringing feedback of these stakeholders to the organization so that they can evolve. And I'm going to bring you here 7 examples of the influence of the integral thinking on the day-to-day of our methodology in the models used here at Humanizadas. So for those of you who know Humanizadas, and maybe you're going to bring a little bit of an understanding of why certain things are in a certain way. And for those of you who do not know, I invite you to get to know Humanizadas. There are organizations and NGOs and companies. There are a great deal of public entities in Brazil that are using Humanizadas to rethink everything that they do. So the first thing that the integral thinking influences us is the way in which we interpret and understand the world around us. Here I am simplifying the levels of consciousness of Ken Wilber, bringing this approach of Lalu. And when we look at a historical perspective, 10,000 years ago, we had a lot of an authoritarian paradigm. 1,000 years ago, we are here in the Middle Ages, the Roman Empire, so we have a paradigm of control and command. 100 years ago, the paradigm was in terms of productivity. Until here, we're talking about the Industrial Revolution. Gaylor and Ford are here, and there's a look that's very much toward human resources, and we try to optimize as most as we can of these resources. We want to leverage them. And so 30 to 50 years ago, we started talking about culture and sustainability. And in the 21st century, it's important to remember that we are here and the paradigm is oriented toward a digital world and a complex world. And this perspective in terms of an evolution of a stage of maturity that's simpler is a way to connect and to bring perception and sense making of how organizations in Brazil now are operating and how we can support these organizations and the leaders in terms of elevating their operating system. And this in terms of the mental model, not just the physical and technological model, of course, that's what I'm talking about. The second point on how the theory influences humanizadas, it's in our purpose and our theory for change. We have the understanding that the humanizadas wants to democratize the evolution of the consciousness, and by democratizing it, we want to scale things up with the knowledge that's present in a few institutions and a few leaders. So we want to get this knowledge to the society, to more people. And our theory for change is to support the elevation of the awareness and the stages of maturity for people so that we can elevate the stages of maturity for organizations so that they can generate a positive impact in the society and in the planet. Here it would be what we like to say of the SDG 0, to elevate the level of awareness and consciousness of people and organizations so that we can generate a positive impact for the other sustainable development goals. The third point of how the integral thinking influences humanizadas is in the map that we use to understand and monitor an evolution journey of organizations. So we came up with the concept of rations. We studied used the Murray's study to evaluate credit ratings of ratings of countries and organizations, and based on the concept of Integral and Ken Wilber and Lalu and Susan and Beck and several others, we integrated this approach. And I think that's very beautiful, right? To be able to integrate things in a perspective of a financial world, looking at the investment world, with a perspective of a conscious world and an integral world, and in the ratings scale that are measuring the quality of management and relationships. So the measurement of ratings is done by means of an evaluation of listening to several stakeholders from organizations, so clients, suppliers, partners, society, and investors. And it's important to remember that at moments like SDG and all of these talk, a great deal of the instruments today that are used by the organizations are instruments that are self-declaratory. A team of experts, a team of auditors from the organization, or a team of very few people assess an organization with an impact, and those are rare, the instruments that in fact talk to people and hear people. And our approach is very different from the traditional market approaches. We in fact want to assess the collective intelligence. We in fact want to assess the perception of the multiple stakeholders and the multiple parties that are interested in the success of an organization. And we are always following and measuring this journey. The fourth point is how we assess things. We use puncture points of the management models that follow 5 principles: a higher purpose, value strategy, conscious culture, learning and change, and conscious leadership. And we want a perspective from the individual, the relationships, and the organization. Many of you are looking at this slide now, and you are going to think about the meta model of management. And in fact, these constructs from the approach are based on the management meta model. And here we have an integration of the methodologies from the origin and the methodologies of the Raj, Sisodia, and also Frédéric Laloux and others, and proposed by Kaka. And we have this convergence of perspectives so that we can assess principles. And in the end, it's an evaluation of the measurement so that we can talk about the rating, as I told you. So we are systematically helping. In this year, we have more than 300 organizations being helped in their assessments so that we can identify how they are operating within an integral perspective so that they can have action plans and they can evolve. And what we are realizing is that this model is, in fact, you have statistical correlations for this model to elevate the levels of consciousness. And I'm talking about organizations here. So the fifth point on how the integral thought helped influentiate Humanizadas is in this repertoire of indicators that are guided to multiple capitals. I understand that everything that's multiple is how Humanizadas works. So multiple stakeholders and multiple capitals, that's what we talk about here at Humanizadas. So this model is in the background. We are coming up with indicators to try to have a more integral and systemic perspective that it's guided for the multiple capitals, as we mentioned. And so a few examples of indicators that we are assessing at Humanizadas today is reputation of the brand, ESG performance, capacity for innovation, well-being, transparency and ethics, trust, inclusion and diversity, experience of the society, experience of the clients, experience of the collaborators, of the employees. So it's a very strong approach in terms of the social side and the cultural, and we think about human capital and intellectual capital as well. It looks to complement, it wants to complement intangible capital, and in other instruments and other approaches are more oriented to other things, and they do not contemplate that. And the sixth point of the influence of the integral thinking at Humanizadas is the awareness of the need and the relevance to sustain polarities. And here I'm showing an example of a polarity of a graph that we use a lot in Humanizadas here, and showing the financial performance of stocks. And here you can see in orange, we have B3 companies, or the Brazilian stock market companies. And here we have EZB3, 30 companies from the index. And in purple, we have humanized companies. They're working with higher stages. So in the timeline of 32 years here, this data is from 1988 to the end of 2020, going through a lot of political crisis, exchange of political parties, and even the pandemic itself. And here we can observe that the companies that operate in higher stages of maturity, they generate values for several stakeholders, and they have a better performance in the financial point of view, 5.5 higher than the average of the market, and 1.1 average of the ISEB3. And what we mean by this graph is to break this paradigm of believing that companies either exist to make the world a better place, or they exist to give profit. And we try to show that that's not the case. There's no such conflict. It's not a matter of one thing or the other. It's one thing and the other. And in the book, Conscious and Entrepreneurship, I always talk about this polarity, profit and positive impact. The seventh point of influence of the integral thinking is precisely this SDG 0. So we want to raise the level of consciousness to enable systemic transformation. There's one intent of tending to the needs of the society, of the humanity and the planet, which is to develop the consciousness or the awareness individually and on an organizational level, so that we can build networks and we can share the same purpose, so that we can develop joint practices, so that we can transform these emerging practices into a new standard. And when we talk about transforming these practices into a new standard, we're talking about a cultural transformation. We're talking about changing the paradigm of the society. To me, that's extremely relevant. When we think about the complexity of the problems that we're going through, an example would be, how can we provide for 9 billion people in a sustainable manner, regenerating the ecosystems and fighting inequality and promoting prosperity? When we look at this complexity of the digital world, and the complexity is growing more and more, and the human capacity to answer to this complexity is not growing as much. It's not growing at the same pace. And we are precisely here at this point where complexity is overcoming our human capacity to answer to these problems in terms of environmental crisis, social crisis, crisis of governance that we are going through. And so what would happen if there were going back to another stage of maturity, regression, going backwards in terms of individual and organizations, that would mean being further and further in terms of solving these problems in this graph that's growing more and more in terms of complexity. So one of the intentions is to precisely elevate the human potential or to elevate human power. That's SDG 0 to me. It's to elevate the level of organizations, of individuals and then organizations, and to have an impact on the society. And the data that we have in Humanizadas, we are doing that. We see that it is possible to measure, monitor, and evolve in this stage of organizations. And yes, elevating the stage of maturity for the organizations. And by doing that, we're going to have an impact in multiple capitals. An important point to bring here is that today we're talking a lot about purpose, diversity, ESG, and SDGs. And I understand that we also need to acknowledge that these issues actually require a deep cultural transformation in the way we operate, the way we talk to ourselves, to other people, to the society and the environment around us. And a question that I'd like to leave you with is, what is your role in all of these changes? And so we want to move a new economy by using data intelligence to think about a new society. And for those of you who want to access the slides of the lecture and to use the results, I believe the knowledge is there to be shared. So whoever wants to access these slides, you can use the slides that are here. You only need to use this link, this QR code. And I'd also like to leave you a special invitation for those of you who are participating in the event to get to know Humanizadas and our products in 2022. And for those of you who are participating in the event, there's going to be a special invitation and with an opportunity of discount in our products and evaluations for next year. So whoever wants more information, my contact information is here and I'm available. And it's a great honor and pleasure to be here sharing with you, talking about this path and what I learned through this journey. So thank you very much. Wonderful, Pedro. Thank you so much. I'd like to have the same thing now with Elo. I'm going to ask Sean to come and also say a few words.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marcelo.
Congratulations. Thank you, Marcelo.
Pedro, holy smokes.
Pedro, oh my God.
It's amazing. Wow. You know, it was back in 2019 when you launched your survey using the 10 capital framework, and you got very impressive results back then, where you were looking at how by expanding the definition of capital from a mono-capitalism focused on financial capital primarily, to then including the 10 capitals from the framework I've developed. And one of the things that came out of that was noticing that a different picture emerged when you used all 10 capitals, and looking at companies before the pandemic and then companies during the pandemic, and which capitals got emphasized by companies in the face of the crisis of the pandemic. And it was very powerful to see the work you were doing then. And I'm so impressed to get this update on all that you have accomplished since 2019. In just 2 years, you've taken the rocket ship to the far orbit of integral business and really paving a new path for all of us to think about the ways the integral model and integral thinking can be applied to business and to conscious business in particular. So well done, very amazing presentation, and very exciting to see what you and your team are doing. One of the reasons why your presentation really inspires me is, the first book that I wrote was Integral Ecology with Michael Zimmerman. And I think I saw Ari here who translated that in Portuguese, bless his heart. So it's really my love and care for the planet that brought me into Integral. And, when I left John F. Kennedy University, my teaching position, and I launched Meta Integral, it was really to go into business and to work with business as a way of transforming the planet. Because as an ecologist, as an environmentalist, it was very painfully obvious that capitalism is destroying the planet. And so I naturally began to think, how could we flip that around? How might capitalism actually help us save the planet? And so that's what led me to develop this expanded framework of the 10 capitals. And so to see the ways in which you're taking that, several steps farther down the road is very exciting. One thing that really stood out for me in your presentation are the 7 examples of how you're using integral to inform the work that you and your team are doing. And each of those are very worthwhile and notable, right? So any one of those could be enough to have, an integral business in a sense, but you're doing all 7, right? So it's like you've injected the DNA of integral thinking into every facet and aspect of what you're doing, in terms of how you get the big picture, your theory of change, the way you're rating financial, situations, the 5 principles times first, second, third person, which that was a very cool chart. I like charts, and that was a really cool chart. And yeah, it was very similar to Marcelo's meta management. And then the indicators and the ways you're including multiple capitals and multiple indicators. And I was really excited to see polarities and the way you're working with polarities. Because I was even imagining, when I was preparing some of my thoughts for the conversation I'm going to have with Diane later, that the future of integral, I think, includes polarities up front more powerfully. And so I think your work's an example of what that can look like. I often joke that polarities is the 5th element, quadrants, or rather the 6th element, quadrants, levels, line states, types, and polarities, because we find polarities in all 4 quadrants. And that's one of the primary criteria for whether or not something's an element. And Ken himself even said yesterday when he was with us that he's open to, adding more elements to the model if the evidence and data is there. And since you're an integral data science guy, I think we can start to make the case to Ken that polarities need to be added to the AQUIL system. And then, the ways you're connecting it to the SDGs. So all of it's just very exciting, Pedro. And it really shows that you're not just using the integral model the way Ken presents it in his books. I mean, what really stands out to me is you've taken the red pill. You have ingested integral into your heart, into like the way you relate to the world. And then out of that has come a number of ways of using integral thinking to inform many, many aspects of what you and your team at Humanidades are doing, right? And so it's not a cookie cutter integral approach. And this is the way integral should be, right? Where we use it, we transform integral in the process of applying integral, and we come up with new frameworks and models and distinctions informed by integral thinking that allow us to gain traction in the world, trying to make the change that we know the world so desperately needs. And it's really obvious that you're doing that in many ways. So thank you. Marcelo?
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Pedro,
Pedro,
concordo com todos os pontos.
I totally agree with Sean. I'd like to bring something here. We already had this talk, but I'd like to talk to you about something that you mentioned on the chat yesterday, and it has to do a bit with what Ken Wilber mentioned yesterday, the idea of reaching the critical mass of 10% of people in the second layer, in the second tier, and that causes a more significant change in the stage of awareness of the stage of consciousness of the system. And this idea of Humanizadas being the SDG 0, right? The Sustainable Development Goal 0. And there's this nice thing of having the meta capitals, and you have these 4 associated with purpose and the idea of awareness and sensation and consciousness of the SDG 0. So how are you feeling this? And I think there's another important point as well that I'd like to mention, that Sean mentioned, that in a certain way is connected to a great deal of what she does. And somebody else mentioned is to have an integral theory as an Intel inside. You don't declare that up front. So how do you feel that? I imagine that a great deal of your clients are orange or green. I mean, what are the problems when you are at the front of the war? Let's put it that way. Well, everything happens, really. I'd just like to show Sean something. Sean, I don't know if you know this drawing over here. Have you ever seen that? Do you recognize that?
No.
Those are the meta capitals.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Those are
Now
the
I
meta
see
capitals.
these folks. Yeah. Very nice.
São os metacapitais, cada
Those are the
post-it.
meta capitals. Each post-it is one of the issues that we work with at Humanizadas. And in the review of the instrument, we use meta capitals. It's an intent to search for that and to bring an integral outlook into that. So we are oriented the meta capitals in the evolution of the instruments of the Humanizadas.
Wonderful.
So I'd like to show you that. This is a review of the instrument for 2022. That's why it's out there. This point that Sean brought up, and also Marcelo did as well, you know, this presentation that I did, I think the team of Humanizados did not see it that way with that explanation that I gave you today. A great deal of the time, I don't even mention integral thinking. I don't mention that too much, except for the references and the sources, of course. And I always mention the references, of course. And the reports of Humanizadas, there are the citations, Ken Wilber, Lalu, and for the metal capitals, they're not there, but they are there are our lens, really. And in the moments in which I talk about integral is when you're going deeper on the discussion with methodology, with the person, because in the instrument of Humanizadas, you have several instruments that are embarked. So there are several instruments and tools used in the methodology of Humanizadas. So you can see that it is integrated. You have multiple instruments, multiple perspectives that are integrated. It's a methodology that is integral. It has this outlook in terms of the human development and organization as well. And it also has an evolution methodology. You have a flow of time, you have past, present, and future of the organization. So I mentioned integral when I talk about this in-depth methodology with someone. Everything happened, Marcelo. I mean, there was even a case in which an organization called me before I went to a talk with the board. They called me to the side and they were concerned and said, look, don't mention integral here, please. Do not mention that. And they even asked me that. Like, I was like, no, don't worry. I'm not going to mention anything. And if don't worry. Cool. Because, you know, I think there's a prejudice. You know, you need to be careful because it's something that we're learning at Humanizadas. And there's a book by Don Beck. I think it's fantastic. It's Mastering the Human Coaching. It's a black cover book, and Pondek mentions the case of South Africa and the intention of Nelson Mandela, and Mandela was influenced by integral thinking, and how he looked and how he built a speech in which he would embark multiple perspectives, people working in the society with different stages. And here at Humanizadas, we are trying to learn how to do a communication that is coherent with what we are, but at the same time, it can talk to other people. It has to create a connection with organizations. We need to be careful to try to do a simpler communication, the simplest as we can, words that try to go more to the essence of it so that things don't collapse. I mean, to be very honest here, we have a lot of government entities, we have schools, we have NGOs, we have a lot of people working with Humanizadas. We have companies that are going through a crisis, amber, green, orange, they are in different stages. And we're trying to support a speech, we're trying to have a narrative that uses instruments and data that try to have a dialogue and try to look for the evolution of these companies that are in different stages. It's not easy. I'd say that we can still support that very well. This is something that we're still learning as we go along, how to create a connection and how to support the journey, the evolution journey of each company in its own stage. Very well, Pedro. There's a question from Martin here, and then I'm going to go to another place. Martin says, wonderful talk, Pedro. I have a question, comment. Both in the LaLu book as in what Pedro says, there is a hypothesis that organizations evolve in the same spiral that individuals. Can we in fact accept that a hypothesis? For example, can we have an organization that is green? I think I will start to answer from what I thought this question meant, and then I'll hear from you. I just participated in the TOI festival and started talking about the TO festival of the reInvent. There's no TO organization in my view, because there's no 10% of TO leadership to sustain an organization in this level of complexity. So I think this is a very important point, Martin. And Sean can say that better than I can. But so insofar as I know, the approach of the evidences of stages of consciousness that are more solid are from individuals. So the school of Loving and Piaget, who gave origin to action inquiry, and Suzanne von Freud, and they are individual experiences. There are a few, I think there's more literature and less scientific evidence. I don't know if Sean can talk about a study or not, but I think this is a good point, because in organization, you know, how complex it is, the gravity systems, they operate in very different systems in terms of subsystems. And I think this is a very important discussion. And I believe that one of the benefits of the reInvent organizations, this event that I attended, was to bring that to the conversation. And one of the very bad things that happened was because they made an oversimplification of what it means to have stages of consciousness and culture.
Yeah, I will just add, you know, there's an interesting debate on this topic, and some people make the case that there are a lot of integral teal organizations, and then other people make the case that there are no teal organizations at all, right? So I think the truth lies somewhere in between those two possibilities. You know, I think what's being highlighted by the position that there are many integral organizations, the true but partial aspect of that is there are many organizations that are inspired by integral models and approaches and thinking, and they're looking for ways to bring that to inform what they're doing, right? And some are being successful and some are struggling, but they're figuring it out and they're exploring, they're experimenting. So I think there are a lot of organizational experiments exploring integral elements and aspects. The aspect of there's no teal organization, that perspective, I think what's true but partial about it is, yes, we're really just at the beginning of that process, and the organizational structures are deeply encoded with the other memes, and it's going to take a while to do integral organizations that are big, right? A small organization with 4 or 5 people, yeah, like that can be very integral in many ways. You know, an organization with 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, you know, the more employees, the more leaders, the more departments, the more divisions, the harder it is for it to be an integral organization, and to have integral consciousness flowing throughout it, right? Because you get just more people, more variety of worldviews and approaches. You know, Keegan's work with deliberately developmental organizations and LaLu's work with teal organizations, I think has done a lot to help move that forward, and for there to be better and better examples and more experiments. I believe that, yes, there are many teal organizations, and I also believe there are no teal organizations. So again, it just depends on kind of exactly what we mean by that position. But I think we're headed in the right direction. And I think Pedro's organization is an example of a teal organization, right? An organization that's using these ideas to build their DNA, and everything they're doing is informed by an integral consciousness. And then they're helping to bring that integral consciousness into other organizations. So I think there's a lot to celebrate, and we're also just at the very beginning of a transformative process.
Acho que a pergunta do Martinho,
I think Martin's question is excellent. I liked hearing from Marcelo and Sean. I'm going to try to do my perspective without thinking that I'm right or anybody is wrong. There's no right or wrong. It's just my view based on the data that I have. looking at Humanizadas, I don't think Humanizadas is a teal company, a teal organization, although there's a purpose and an intent and a business model of a second tier. I think in the culture we still don't support the second tier. We still have a long way to go to support the previous stages. I feel the need to separate two concepts here, a concept of education and a concept of science. Education is the sharing of knowledge, learning, and science is the study of reality, deep questioning. I'm going to make a metaphor just to try to explain what I'm going to try to say. Once someone at the University of São Paulo, USP, it was a PhD, a professor, said that Enneagram does not work for anything. This Enneagram, that's not science. And I questioned my professor. And I said, look, have you found any study refuting the Enneagram? No, I never researched that. So I researched Enneagrams. And there are studies in China validating Enneagrams for individuals. And I shared that with someone, a series of cases. And I said, look, if you find any other studies showing that it does not work, send that to me, please, because I want to know. That to me is science. It's put knowledge to the test, to check it, to try to know the reality as it is. And when you talk about systemic I have not found people showing that it works in the constellation in what the other example. It's the same thing about what Martin was saying. A great deal of the development of levels of consciousness, it's very probable that the scientific study with more validation, which is Susan's, a great deal of the theory has to do with individuals and not organizations. So the closer to what we have of history in our organizations, that would be bearish. And Marcelo has serious criticism to his approach and methodology. I'm not even going to go into that matter, but my point is that we have not a lot of critical mass to talk about levels of consciousness of organizations. I finished my PhD next year. I'm doing that since 2018. I'm going to finish next year. I'm going to complete next year. And I probably won't need to do everything that I wanted. I will probably have a roadmap of research for the next 2 years or decades. And this is a theme that I want based on the data from Humanizadas. I want to consolidate the data and look at the organization so that I can put things into light, on the development of consciousness and stages of maturity, and then I can talk about it. My research hypothesis says that, yes, it is possible to measure these stages of maturity for the organizations, because at the end of the day, we can remember the Ubuntu concept, I am, because your humanity is in my humanity. Since organizations are formed by individuals, Natura does not exist, Magalu does not exist, companies from Brazil, people exist, and these people make up the organizations. And if these people have levels of consciousness, then this collective of people in a certain stage of maturity, in a certain consciousness exists. And now that's what we want to do with Humanizadas. But now you open this directory with Martin, talking about complexity of networks. He's going to disagree with you on this point, but then we should have a workshop on organizations and complexity, right? And Martin can help us organize that, and not necessarily this idea here that individuals and then have a narrative. But anyway, let's just stop it at that. We are reaching the end of our time here. And in a certain way, all three of us are talking about principles and businesses of a second tier. So I'd like to end by talking a bit about the challenges that we face individually to talk about this business. And I can begin. I think one of the points that make me talk about a challenge of having till organizations is knowing what I know. And we are trying to work with an ecosystem and how challenging it is, because the structures and the artifacts are not around. And whenever we are creating new drawings, when we're looking to go to that space, I've been working since 14 years, and I worked as a leader for more than 25 years. And I go into a place of providing answers and dealing with everything as a problem, and try to be assertive. And my leadership is more egocentric than cosmocentric. So I think I work a lot on myself. I have reasonable consciousness and awareness, but I still feel a lot of challenge and I feel a lot of difficulty because the culture of the society gives this idea that there's no critical mass, that it's enough in the second tier, and it makes everything harder. And so I'd like to go to the talk of Jeff and Benson, that everything is all right. It's only the evolution taking place, and let's do what we can, and the result, maybe we won't see it in this lifetime. So I'd like Sean and then Pedro to say their final words at this time, please.
Yeah, I'm just great to reconnect with you, Pedro, and to get such an exciting update on the work you're doing. And I'm looking forward to just seeing what you continue to do. It feels like you're just at the beginning of making a big difference in Brazil and in the world. And I think you've shown us a lot of ways that we can begin to think about including integral principles in our various projects. And so I think that inspiration is very much welcomed and needed, to have concrete examples like the one that you and Hilo before you provided, so that we can see that these big, beautiful, abstract ideas actually do translate into how to be in the world in a different way and how to be working with other people informed by integral ideas. So thank you very much. I'm wishing you very much success, and let's stay in touch. There are new developments on my end with the Meta Capital framework, so we should compare notes because we're starting to do more software development, and so there might be some synergies for us to explore. But yeah, really, really excited to see your presentation tonight.
Muito obrigado por te ouvir, Sean.
Thank you very much, Sean. I'm very glad. Thank you, Marcelo, as well. It's a great pleasure once again. It's a wonderful pleasure. And Martin. Martin is in my PhD advisory board. He participated in that. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm trying to be open to what's happening, and I'm trying to bring the contribution that I can of what I know and I can do and what we're researching. And we are data-oriented. I connect a lot with Sean in terms of the models, in terms of the visual and understanding of the organizations. Marcelo, Bia, Cato, everyone from the Integral Institute Brazil, Andressa, who's here doing the sign language translation. Thank you very much for everything. Thank you, Pedro. All right, thank you very much to all of you. So now I'm going to call break. But before everything else, I'd like you to access our channel on Slack. We have a very special channel there for you to interact, and you can get to know our community and interact about these wonderful cases that we got to know a bit, these cases on education and business cases. And you can also say what you thought about this movement, Integral Brasil. We're going back, we will be back in 5 minutes time.
Olá, nós vamos retornar agora.
Hello, everyone. We're just getting back together, but before starting, I would like to give a message about the Integral Institute Brazil. So to honor this 10-year anniversary, to honor the people that started this movement 10 years ago, like Marcelo, Delmar, and also reminding people that were really important and are part of this movement. People that are here as council, Marcelo as president, Lilian Shibata as the vice president of the board, Adriana Barros, Ricardo Carro, Admilson, Vanessa, Kelly Cristina, Paulo César, Eduardo Jacobazzi, that are part of the board as volunteers that are on our daily basis, as Rosângela Campos, Isabel Podolski, Pedro Morel, Yari, that was also here yesterday. So our thanks to all of you that make a difference for all of us here in Integral Brazil. The team that are working in this event as volunteers that were throughout those 10 years in the Institute. As a person that was arriving in, I honor all of you with a lot of heart and a lot of emotion. So moving forward, I would like to invite two people that are very important, Sean and Diane, for this very important moment that we are hoping and waiting for. Diane, Sean.
Hey, Sean.
Hey.
Hey, hello. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, Diane.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Marcelo, good to see you. Hi, Beatrice. Hi, Sean.
So, I'm
Sejam
so happy.
bem-vindos. Marcelo, por favor, dê sequência aí na apresentação.
Marcelo, move forward.
I'm so happy to have you both here. When we have this idea, I don't remember having you both sharing something that I was watching or being with you, and then you are friends in my heart, so I love you both. I've been learning with you for such a long time, and then you're two pioneers in the integral movement. So I would like to ask each one of you just to introduce yourself. So Sean has already done it, but perhaps you could talk a little bit more about your role in the integral in the beginnings and how, because part of what we are going to talk today is integral beyond Ken. So how you're seeing what's going on in the world and how you see it unfolding and growing out of Ken's influence. There's always going to be the backbone of it, but I really like to hear each one of you and doing a quick intro, and then you can engage in conversation.
Sean, do you want to begin?
Sure. So I was very fortunate as a young graduate school student to get connected with Ken. I had read a few of his books and was totally smitten, totally in love with the ideas and the maps and the model. And Ken invited me out to the first meeting of the Integral Institute in 1999 at the end of the year. And so I began very early on with Integral Institute and worked for the Integral Institute for over 10 years and a number of roles. I never lived in Boulder, so I was never part of the inside crowd, as it were, but I was involved with many aspects of a number of initiatives and projects. And I developed several graduate programs based on integral theory, and created the Integral Theory Conference and the Integral Journal, and helped publish many books through the SUNY Press. So I've mostly been involved from an academic perspective, but then I left the university to go into integral business and to bring the ideas into the world in that context. And, you know, it's been important to me to always expand the conversation beyond, you know, Ken's particular approach to integral and to put it in dialogue with other approaches such as Roy Bhaskakar's critical realism or Edgar Morin's complex thought, because I always felt that integral had a lot to contribute to those other approaches, and those other approaches had a lot to contribute to integral. So I guess in a sense, you know, to Marcelo's point, I've kind of always been interested in the future of integral beyond Ken, you know, while at the same time always deeply loving and embracing Ken and what he brings, but always wanting to situate it in a larger integral landscape. So I'm excited to see where Diane and I go in our exploration. And I want to say we had to, you know, it's fancy meeting you here in Brazil, Diane. And I think we did that once before.
We did, yeah.
House. So
yeah,
we keep having to go to Brazil to connect with one another. So
yeah, it's very, yeah, it's really good to see you too, Sean. So in an interesting way, I think if Sean really came through reading Ken and through his study and his academic research and his writing, I kind of rode into the integral scene, you could say, kind of karmically, in the sense that I had never really read Ken, other than I read, like many people, I read Grace and Grit a long time ago. And I remember having a very profound and intimate experience with it, but it didn't particularly lead me to read much more of Ken's work. But I was introduced to Ken and to the integral seminar team when my Zen teacher, Genpo Roshi, did the Big Mind for a retreat there. And Ken was very smitten with that particular technique. And I think what he appreciated about it was that it gave a glimpse of this unconditioned, opened quality of mind that is, you know, beyond ego and conceptual thought. And I think my role at Integral Institute in an interesting way was to take some of the elements of the theory and to provide the experiential experience to the participants. So I worked to create exercises around 3-2-1 of perspectives. I created an exercise called Evolving Worldviews, where I gave people a taste of moving from ego through to cosmic centric. We created the 3-2-1 of shadow, so that Integral had its own particular version of shadow work. And we did an exercise called the lifeboat to kind of confront mortality and see the non-duality of life and death. You know, so I just, I got to, in a certain way, be sort of you know, if Sean's on one end of the teeter-totter, I'm kind of on the other end, and we're sort of, you know, providing these reference points for how to enter into really what is integral consciousness. You know, what does it mean to function freely with an open state of mind that's available to change? So it's really nice in a way that we complement each other. And it was nice, Marcelo, that you brought us to Brazil, and that we were in the context back then of Natura and of goodness, truth, and beauty as our kind of inquiry at the time. And so I think we both really benefited from meeting you in Brazil and making these connections.
Yeah, and actually, you were just saying that the perspectives exercise, the 3-2-1 to shadow, and the bolt exercise, it was so impactful. It's still something that we do a lot. There is this embodiment program that there are a lot of people participating here that they are part of our program. And then in one of nights we do the boat exercise, and it's so impactful to people there.
Good.
Yeah. So it's as you were describing, and also I was remembering, Sean was not part of it, but we went to Ilhabela in a retreat, and then we did a constellation on integral. Remember that on the dark?
Yes, I remember that. It was so amazing. Yeah. I remember I saw a snake cross my path that day. I remember.
Yeah.
That was really nice.
There are a lot of snakes.
Yeah. It was very, because we also have that connection with nature, all of us,
Yes.
The natural world is really important to all of us.
Yes. So Diane, where are you today? So you've been writing books. That's not in the beginning of your journey. It was not much of it, and I think you launched 3 different books, right? 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, I've written three books. Yeah,
I did a mediation training with you, and it was so nice to reconnect.
Yeah.
So where are you in your practice today?
Well, so I was, I grew up in the integral life practice seminars. And so I was always concerned with practice. And I would say most fundamentally, since the work that we all did directly with Ken and with the Institute or with the seminars, part of that experience kind of dialed down a little bit. I put a lot of work into a program called Integral Facilitator, which I did for 7 years, and have just kind of revamped that program. I'm now calling it the Real Life Facilitator Program, because I want leadership and also energetic work to be part of it. So it's leadership, integral facilitator, and energy, because we're working energetically a lot with people. And I think I'm always bridging the sort of first to second person experience. What is one's first person experience? What truth is being disclosed? How can I express both the, you could say what reality is preserving and what it's innovating, and can I be part of that emergence, but also really value what is being preserved as well as what is, you could say, beyond preserving and innovating, so what is the truth that's disclosed in this first person, and then how can we express it with each other? What is it that we can do to support this same level of freedom and liberation and disclosure in our relationships? And so I think I always stopped a little bit short of doing organizational development work. I always identified myself as a mediator, as a facilitator, working in relationship, but never quite making that transition into organizations like Sean has, So for me, it's like, how can I help teams or small groups of people really start to be creative and more liberated in their work? Why not? So that's where I'm located. I think I'm very affected by climate now. I mean, the climate has changed so significantly over the last 5 years in the valley where I live here in Utah, just in terms of rainfall and snowpack, and we're just in a different world right now. And so it's important somehow that, I've always felt an integral perspective would help with climate. I'd love to see the shamans and the scientists at the same table. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but it seems like we need an integral perspective to work with climate for sure. So those are the things that are on my mind. As far as Ken is concerned, I think that, what is the next wave? In some ways, what is integral beyond Terry Patton? Because Terry Patton was a big voice and a figure who really cared about this project, and maybe some of your people on the call know that he passed about, I guess, October 30. Yeah.
And actually, this just a note for you, Diane. Terry and Sean were part of, so we are just celebrating 10 years of II Brazil, and Sean and Terry launched Integral Life Practice in Portuguese back 10 years ago with Sean.
Oh, did he really? Wow.
In a big event. So I think it was 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh. And were you in a men's group with Terry, or didn't you see Terry quite often, Sean?
Yeah, Roger Walsh, Adam Leonard, Dustin DePerna, and Terry Patton and I are all part of a spiritual book club where we pick a different book to read each month and then get together and talk about it. So I got this.
So that's a big loss for you too then. Wow. Yeah. So just feeling Terry's passing and just feeling the time changing, and I'm now in my 60s, and so I'm really working with people in their 30s and 40s much more. Just so that whole question about how does this integral wave, how does it continue into the next phase, I think is a big question for all of us.
Yes. Hey, Sean, where are you? what have you been doing? And
well, you know me, I got a lot of plate spinning.
Yeah.
So just a quick update and overview of my main integral activities. I mean, there's the meta-integral work, which continues, you know, coaching that I do, consulting that I do with companies. There's a company in particular, Unbeatable Mind, which is based in San Diego with retired Commander Mark Devine, that has his whole system based on integral theory. And I've worked with them for the last 7 years. And he has a system called the 5 mountains: physical, emotional, mental, intuitive, and then what he calls kokoro, which is a Japanese word for heart-mind integration. And so it's a good example of kind of the future of integral, which is partly why I'm mentioning it here. Is, you know, he's been deeply inspired by Ken, and he's translated Ken's system into his own kind of, you know, Navy SEAL gone, you know, civilian style fitness, you know, integrated training. And it's very successful. They, you know, there's, you know, over 100,000 people who have engaged those programs. And he has 5 plateaus, which are the 5 levels, you know, and amber, orange, green, and teal. And, you know, and he uses the 4 quadrants, and, you know, he has these 5 mountains. So it's been great to work with them and help them further develop the integral aspects of their programs. There's obviously the leadership work that you and I are doing, Marcelo, with the certificate program in Brazil, and taking that globally with an online version. I also, for the last year and a little bit, have been the Dean of Integral Education at the California Institute for Human Science, and have just launched a new PhD program in integral noetic sciences. So basically, you know, consciousness, philosophy of mind, you know, looking at contemplative studies. And within that is a concentration in anomalous studies, which has been one of my areas of interest in UFOs and paranormal, and looking at what does an integral approach bring to making sense of all of that weirdness. So it's exciting to have, you know, one of the only PhD programs on the planet where you can study anomalous phenomenon, you know, from an integral perspective, or from any perspective for that matter. Also, I've just finished up another book in the Routledge series that I was doing with Roy Bashkar and Nick Headland. And we published, the first one is Meta Theory in the 21st Century. And we're publishing the second one in the next few months. And then the third one should be available next year. So I've continued to work with those 2 books. And again, that's, you know, bringing integral theory into conversation with critical realism and Morin's work, and having, you know, many of the integral scholars like Zach Stein have participated in that. And, you know, and looking at how do we put integral theory in dialogue with other integral systems. The other 2 projects that I work on is the Head Heart Hara work that I'm doing, looking at, you know, the 20+ spiritual traditions that work with those 3 wisdom centers, and exploring the different practices that they've developed to work with those. And I think that's another example of the future of integral. It's like finding new integral models like that make integral ideas accessible to a lot of people. Because I find people really respond well, you know, and as you know, with Marcelo, we've presented that at some of our events, and people really love that. And it's kind of a nice entry point into integral. And it's similar to what Pedro's doing in the organizational context. It's finding these little, you know, entry points for integral practice, you know, or the many examples that Diane just gave us, the practices she created and helped create with the team, you know, that just give people a taste of what a more integral experience of being is like. And then I have a whole set of work I do with the harmonic Enneagram, and developing the geometric 3-dimensional models of the Enneagram system that's also informed by integral theory. So, you know me, got a lot going on.
You're such a wild man.
Yeah, well, the hair, you know, I got to keep up with the hair.
Yeah, as you are touching this, I think my experience with both of you, it's always heartfelt, and then we experience this field Well, I'd like to bring the issue of subtle dimensions and spirituality. I was just listening the other day, Ken talking about that he emphasized not bringing much of the subtle into beginning of integral because his intention is to bring into the academia, and then particularly on the experience of it, it is the field and the energy and the mystery is always present. And then Sean, you can talk a little bit more about the UFOs and so you both go to whenever you want, but I really like to open this space to talk about the subtle and the more spiritual fields present in our works.
Great. Diane, you want to kick it off?
Diane, você quer começar?
Yes, I think what I would say, it is interesting that we all have that in common. I guess one isn't an integralist if one doesn't relate to the gross, subtle, and causal domains and the kind of sort of. I tend to think of the subtle, the Tibetans call it the transformation realm or the bliss realm. But what I experience in the work that I do as a facilitator is that it's just much more efficient to work energetically than to work with the content of what everyone's saying. It's like if you can actually feel, and I think one of the challenges beginning to work energetically is to train people to really feel more fully, because we don't tend to use our felt sense to sense and to feel and to into that domain of our experience, because we've been conditioned to, through really the Enlightenment and empiricism, whatnot, to trust, what's in the gross domain. But the problem with the gross domain is it's highly differentiated and it's highly dualistic. And so when we move into the subtle domain, because there's more continuity, one could say, there's still opposition, there's still polarity, there's still creative emergence, but it's just so much more efficient to work with a group of people from an energetic perspective than to work with the heavy, concrete language. And, I find, and so that's a lot of what I try to do in the facilitation work, is teach people how to listen into the field and how a couple of interventions can change the whole course of a conversation. In the same way that an acupuncturist, will stimulate a kind of sluggish system or sedate a overly nervous system, a facilitator can work that way with groups as well. And then we can invite flow, we can invite the state of flow, and we can also, to use Claire Graves' expression of flex flow, the state of flow. So the state and stage of flow becomes much more available when one works energetically. I don't know how you do it otherwise. So that's kind of maybe just a little opening bid. What are you thinking, Sean?
You cut out, Diane. Were you passing the talking stick to me?
Yeah, I was saying, just as an opening bid, I like thinking about the state of flow and also the stage of flex flow that Claire Graves talks about.
Yeah, I was excited to see that, Integral Life has recently posted a number of talks with Ken going into the subtle energy science and kind of building on that, because I do feel that's an area that Ken includes, but he doesn't talk a lot about. And when he does talk about it, it's a very kind of Western sanitized version, as I've come to understand it. There's a lot going on in the subtle realms and in subtle fields and subtle energetic spaces. And, I think my own spiritual practice led me into, working with, what's called the Fey traditions, working with the intelligences of the natural world. And so I struggled for many years of how to reconcile that with integral theory, because, it's included in the map, but it's not really a conversational piece. It's like kind of what to do with that. But I carried on, and as I went deeper in the practices and the yoga of those traditions, I just kept having experiences that indicated that there are a lot of different types of intelligences in different realms and dimensions that we can choose to engage and interact with and participate with. But because I'm such a staunch integralist, I've always been like interested, like how do we expand integral to include that more? And, the university that I'm with now, California Institute for Human Science, it specializes in biofield research and subtle energy systems. Like that's kind of its specialty. And I'm excited about that because I've always been fascinated with that. And also because of my interest in what I call exostudies, which is the study of all extraordinary experiences and anomalous phenomenon, be they UFO or ET encounters or ghosts or out-of-body experiences or psychedelic experiences. Like I'm very interested in what all these crazy experiences tell us about the nature of reality. And one of the things that I've come to realize in studying all of that very intensely for the last few years, where I've pretty much dove into probably 300 or 400 books to really try and wrap my head around what is all of this, is all of it's related to subtle energies. Like, it's basically subtle energies and energetic systems and electromagnetic fields seem to be involved with all paranormal phenomenon and anomalous experiences. So I think that highlights that there's a lot of value in bringing an integral view to the study of subtle energies and subtle experiences, because I think they play a much bigger part in our life than we realize. And I think we're just beginning to understand them. The esoteric traditions have a lot to say about them, but they also have a lot of, kind of mythic and magical and even rational views of it that I don't think are helpful anymore. And likewise, a lot of our secular mainstream scientific culture doesn't know what to do with it. So I think an embrace of the subtle realities and beings and energy fields invites us into an integral mode of consciousness, because I really feel it's really only at an integral point that we can start to make sense of it and start to engage it in a more fruitful way. And Terry and I had a lot of debates about it because, he kind of comes from the good old Ken Wilber school of it's all of that's just a distraction from awakening and enlightenment. It's like, we just got to get to the one as soon as possible. And I'm waving the flag of many saying, yes, but, all this diversity of experience is so interesting and important. And, why not be able to fly like Superman or, do all these crazy things that Mike Murphy talks about in his Future of the Body? Like, let's explore the metahuman, and do it on the path to awakening, but, let's bring that along.
Talking about Terry and this, the idea of dying and perhaps touching it, I just saw your dialogue with Terry, Diane, and it was so touching and so deep and so beautiful. And then just based on what Sean, because when you're saying about exploring the meta human and the potentiality of it, it's in one hand, but I also see the subtle realms and to experience different levels of life, as Diane was saying, and the subtlety of it. And for me, one of the most powerful is just facing death from the physical body and the physical death. So how was the experience of sharing that space with Terry?
It was very intimate. I spoke to Terry a week or so, just very shortly after he and Roger Walsh had gone for a walk, and he had lost his breath. And Roger said to him, this is, just a month ago, you could, you had full lung capacity, so you need to go in, you need to go get this checked out. And so he went in, and I guess he had, I'm not sure what it was, Sean, but like an MRI or something in the morning on his birthday, which was April 1st. And then I was on a little clubhouse call with him at noon, wishing him a happy birthday. And then he got the results back and found that he had, he had lung cancer. And so it was very profound to kind of to journey with him in the sense that he got on the express train, you know. I mean, there wasn't a lot in Terry's journey from April 1st to when he died on October 30th that wasn't just full on. Like, there weren't a lot of moments of hope. I mean, he, in terms of his ability to survive his disease, but I don't know, I feel like Terry conveyed and communicated so much beauty in his process. And he there were two things that he kept repeating, and both I was always very struck by. One was how he was just committed to appreciating the moment, and that his teacher, his guru, Adida, had instructed him in dying to surrender to the intelligence of the heart. And I think he really did that. So I was, you know, I mean, you can't lose a good friend like Terry and not just be heartbroken. So of course it was heartbreaking. And at the same time, his equanimity and his generosity was just so potent. And his, you know, Terry had the greatest laugh in the world. You know, I mean, when the guy laughed, he laughed from, you know, from the bottom of his feet to his crown chakra. You know, so, and that was just always present right up until the very end. I understand that the day he died, or not the day he died, but the day he went into unconsciousness, that he'd had a dance party in his living room. So Terry was just, you know, full blast, and just for me, I guess I just also, Marcelo, I just felt I can't think of Terry's dying process and not feel my own heart open. I was so touched. Yeah. Yeah. What was it like for you, Sean, to be with him in those last months?
Yeah. I mean, my wife, you know, really focuses on death and dying. And so, you know, she did hospice work for many years, and she's developing a process of death inquiry, and she's been teaching courses. And so I am often in conversation with her, exploring death and dying and our relationship to it. And, you know, and her big thing is always, you know, like, just be alive now, because like you could die at any moment. Like, you know, just be present to what's happening. And so as Terry entered his journey, it was just so inspiring to see that he really did turn into that, and just really, and not only did that for himself, but he brought a lot of us along with him. And, you know, in his final course, you know, he had over 600 people in that course. And I got many emails from people who were in that course and who knew I knew Terry, and basically just said, I've been so touched. You know, it's like they just were so touched by the course. They just had to tell someone, and they just felt I was in close proximity to Terry, and they were like telling me, right? And, you know, and which just, I think, attests to the power of the quality of conscious awakening he brought to that process. And, you know, I think Dustin DePerna described it really well. When stars die, you know, many of them just become brown dwarfs, right? Where their light just kind of dims out and they just kind of disappear. But then there's the supernovas that just, you know, get brighter and brighter as they die. And I really, you know, he said Terry did that. Like, Terry went out as a supernova. You know, he just, the brightness of his heart just got bigger and bigger. And, you know, I think it's interesting that he died basically right after the final, you know, class of that course.
I know.
Right. So it's like that really was his final gift. And, you know, we had, as part of our, you know, book club, we had a meeting with him just a week before he passed, and he was vibrant. He was lucid. He was engaged, you know, so for 2.5 hours, he was with us, you know, discussing, you know, Jamie Wheel's book, you know, Recapture the Rapture. And of course, you know, Terry had a lot of praise and a lot of critiques of that, you know, and that's another good example of the future of integral, you know, or one version of it. And at that point in that conversation, we talked about how, you know, the prognosis was he had 6 more months. And it's just such a reminder that that can be the understanding in one moment, and then a week later, that person can be gone, passed on. and so, and even then it was like, oh man, we only have 6 months. I mean, had he said, I only have a week, like it just would have changed the tone of the conversation, so it's just, I think a reminder to my wife's point, like, you just never know, like, so live every day as fully loving and awake as you can, because at any point things might shift.
Yeah.
It's just present to me that using this place of what we are touching now to talk about the future of integral. So from this place of dying, living, and going beyond, how you experience the unfoldment of integral beyond that.
Yeah, I sometimes think about like that moment when Kin passes, and what that's going to be like for me and for many others. And I think about the many books that he has mostly written, and when might those come out, and will some of those come out after he passes? And it's interesting to have experienced Terry's passing, and to also kind of think about that, because Kin's getting older and his health, it's not always good. And and I feel he has so much more to say and give, just as Terry did, and I just think, it's even like hard for me to think about it now, like what that's going to be like. I think one thing that's happened over the years is there's been a decentralization of integral, from 2000 to even 2010, maybe 2015. Kin was really the anchor and the centerpiece, and in some ways he still is, but in many ways, because of his illness, he's really had to be in the background much more, and a lot of other things have emerged and sprung up around his work and his vision. But so we're in a more decentralized phase of integral, with things like metamodernism, and other approaches emerging. And I see a lot of examples of integral being under the hood, right? So I see integral driving a lot of initiatives, but not in an explicit way. But the leaders of those initiatives are deeply embodied and informed by integral. And like Pedro, and like your point to Pedro, like he doesn't bring that up to the companies, and in fact one company even said, don't mention integral, like shh, don't say it, it's a bad word, if you say it bad things will happen. It's like, so and I think maybe that's the beauty of Kin's vision, is that somehow it's gone not underground, but it's like it's gone into the drinking water, right? It's like, it's flowing through the systems, and it's nourishing many thoughts and systems and initiatives in a way that might be considered more indirect. And that makes me excited. Like I grieve integral, like I grieve where we were in the early 2000s, and I sometimes play the what if game. What if like the band had stayed together? Imagine the songs we could have written, and the world tour we could have done.
Totally.
But it's like everyone's gone on and now has a solo career, right? To various degrees. And so it's an interesting process, to be sure.
And I think it helps to trust that, like Sean said, it's in the water, it's psychoactive. It's both an expression of consciousness, and it's an expression of it. It helps, the model helps us access integral consciousness, but it's also an expression of consciousness. So we can trust it, and we can trust that in the same way that there's a way that, meeting Ken and really just kind of getting the integral download, it really does it's almost like a new software system or a new operating system comes in, and once it's there, it's not going away. So I also feel, I wish the band hadn't broken up, but because we were having such a great time. But on the other hand, it's like a diaspora in which you know, the culture and the insights and all of that get to be spread out precisely because that's what's needed at this time, you know. It's certainly true for all of us. And I think all of us who are involved in the movement in one way or another are having the experience that we're seeing it and we're experiencing it in lots of different places and in lots of different modalities that, you know, we kind of couldn't have predicted in a way. So it's almost like consciousness has always been the one in charge of what's happening. And so we kind of have to remember that.
And I'm wondering, Marcelo, if you could share a little bit about your reflections on the journey of Integral Institute and the future of Integral, you know, from your vantage point in Brazil and just everything you've seen and participated in, and how does your experience fit into some of the things that Diane and I are highlighting, or maybe contrasts with it or adds another consideration?
Yeah, I feel that in one hand, we are like in many different situations, Brazil is kind of our one step before than what's going on in Europe and US, for the good and bad of it in many occasions. So I really feel there's this growing interest and the movement is growing, and I see a lot of initiatives, as you were saying, and also I'm involved in many of them, where they are integrally informed, but not so like there was this Teal festival a couple of weeks ago, and then Lalu is much more famous in Brazil than Ken himself, because Brazilians are quite open, and yet we tend to be more superficial. So, and then I see this movement growing and the interest. So through Lalu's, there is this growing interest in Integral. And Ari, who is Ken's translator, is here. He's teaching courses, also Del Mar at Institute. So there is this growing interest around Integral. We are not feeling the loss because we are kind of following the track, and we are excited in how it's growing and how it's building. And yet, I'm gonna talk in first person. In my experience, what I've been trying to do is really to integrate different fields, and I had just had this experience right after the pandemic started. I was part of 3 different communities, and you know it, Sean, from TRU, from Otto Schammer, and then from Integral, and then from Complexity, from Cognitive Edge. And what I saw was those 3 different communities with very smart, intelligent, influential people in their own lingo, isolated in their own bubble. Also, I was part of Diane with one call with guys from Integral trying to do something around after the pandemic. And I really felt I felt strange because they were just talking in integral lingo among themselves without connecting with what was going on outside. And to me, I really see the potential and opportunity to connect those communities because I see power in having those people that are integrally, they have an integral approach, not even knowing. So like David Snowden, I just had this workshop with Snowden, and then the first 5 minutes he criticized Ken Wilber and Otto Schammer, saying that it's all bullshit. But yet what he proposes in terms of complexity is so elegant and powerful that I see the potential of connecting those dots along the same lines something you tried with Roy Bashkar and Edgar Morin and bring the conversion of so I'm more connected with the idea of how we can converge movements that are already making impact to support transformation. And particularly in Brazil, because we are one step behind, we can be more open. Brazilians are more open and more relational and easy to influence. I see opportunities to Brazil create something that is unique and integrally informed. So, yeah. So
yeah, those integral meetings needed good facilitators.
Oh no, yes. Oh my God, yes. You should hold it. You should hold it. Yes.
Just a couple of structures, you know.
Yeah, just
maybe a shared intention, you know.
Some rules and some good. Yeah. There is one question that so Martin is just saying this conversation is great, and about the idea of subtle realm and everything that we are talking about, the role of technology. I think he's talking about technology inducing states or flow states, and the possibility of amplifying the sense, such as transhumanism, or communicate more intensely in a kind of a telepathic, affecting human development and the future of integral movement. And I'll add my own question. So James will work, and so the kind of induce microdose or doses or ayahuascas, all this kind of elements that can influence the states, and how you see it influencing our own experience of development and evolution.
Yeah, I'll just say two things. Let's see. I'll just say two things briefly. I think when it comes to technology, you know, we talk a little bit about language and cognition as being a beautiful tool and a terrible master. And obviously the same is true of technology. As long as it remains a tool, it's a beautiful tool. But as soon as we don't understand that wisdom and compassion need to be in the driver's seat, then I think, you know, we're already experiencing some of the downsides of that inverse relationship. So how do we bring wisdom and compassion into all of our technological designs? I think is just a question that should be on the table. And we're trying to do that for human beings. You know, how do we do it for technology as well? And then I would say, for me, the role of psychedelics is always, for me, it's always about opening and kind of, you might say, just kind of disrupting the system, creating openings. And then I think for me, I just feel like it all needs to be grounded and integrated and enacted with much more plodding, mundane daily practice. And I think sometimes people get addicted to the big bang and the intensity. And that, for me, that, you know, it's like there's a sudden path and a gradual path, and we have to walk. We get to experience the suddenness, but the gradual path we have to walk. And, you know, it's mundane, but it's just the way it is. So those are my thoughts. I don't know. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I find it interesting the ways the psychedelic revolution is, you know, gaining speed and visibility. You know, John Hopkins has been doing interesting research. You know, it's, you know, even recently, you know, I was reading an article on, you know, using mushrooms for depression. It just showed up in my news feed, right? So, you know, these ideas are becoming more and more considered and explored. And then similarly, like the transformative technology space, you know, like using technology to kind of hack consciousness and, you know, states of awakening, enlightenment. I'm thinking in particular of Jeffrey Martin's work and with the finders, you know, and the research he's been doing in that space. And, you know, I think both of those, you know, the fact that both of those are kind of becoming more and more of, you know, visible and explored, and people have heard of them, I think it's an indication that we're moving from a monophasic culture to a polyphasic culture, meaning we're moving out of a strict adherence to just waking state, rational consciousness. And I think there's more and more indications that culture at large is interested in various forms of states of consciousness. And so our interest in psychedelics is one expression of that. our interest in using technology to explore and amplify or create certain states of consciousness. I mean, how else would we expect a secular rational culture to make room for states of consciousness, right? They would use technology as the entry point, and I think there's both opportunities and dangers in that. But it seems, and likewise with psychedelics or marijuana, it's primarily through the medical uses of that, how they can be used for depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, different mental and physical conditions, right? So we live in a heavily, scientific, medicalized, rational culture, in the West in particular. And so these would be kind of the natural ways where that would start to open up, right? My hope is it continues and kind of like we get beyond those particular frames, and become, better psychonauts exploring the subtle realms without, either of those particular, modalities or in addition to those modalities. I mean, one of the things, just to kind of go into the exo study stuff for a moment, one of the things that blew me away as I started studying it is no matter what contact modality you use, whether it's drumming, meditation, and by meditation, I mean just like Theravadan, meditation, nothing fancy, psychedelics, sounding, chanting, all these different modalities, people report contact with different types of intelligences, right? So all of these, and there's been like 20 different contact modalities identified, and they're basically all the different kind of spiritual activities that everyone in California is doing. And when I realized that all of those forms of spiritual practice are entry points into contact with other types of intelligences, like that just blew me away. Like not everyone who does any of those contact modalities necessarily has that kind of experience. But the fact that all those kinds of practices for some people in some situations results in certain kinds of experiences of interacting with other intelligences, I think it just highlights that there's so many different ways of understanding the cosmos that we're in, and the variety and dimensions that are around us all the time, right? And so when we look at our current culture, it's so far away from that. So anything that helps us kind of get more open to how weird the universe is, I think is a good thing, because as far as I can tell, it's extremely weird. There's a lot of weird shit going on. So
I make contact with you, Sean, and I don't even have to drum.
Right, it doesn't get weirder than that.
Other intelligences that just open my world, absolutely.
I was just to say, because we are running out of time, so I really like to thank you both. Asking each one of you to do your final remarks. I really thank you from my heart. I would like to start with you, Sean, and then asking Diana to, once you do your final comments, Diana, you just guide us in a meditation to close those 2 days of celebrating II in Brazil.
Okay, yeah, sure. Happy to.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm so glad, Marcelo, that you and the II Brazil team decided to acknowledge and celebrate these 10 years. I think what you've done here in Brazil and the contributions to Integral that go way beyond Brazil are a lot. There's a lot that's been shared, and I'm aware of all the other projects and activities that weren't even necessarily talked about in these 2 days, but it's been very successful, and I hope all of you feel proud and excited by what you've done. And it makes me curious to see what the next 10 years is going to be like. And I'm just really grateful for having been able to be a partner with you and II Brazil and be part of many of the experiments and explorations. And just thank you for having me on tonight. It's been really delightful to connect with Diane and to just be part of the conversation. And so thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. It's just great to connect, and it's so inspiring to experience your mind and your heart, and to think about those 300 or 400 books that you've been reading. Just like, that's just amazing. And Marcelo, it's so beautiful just to connect to you. And again, the kind of commitment that you've had to the movement, and to the, as you were saying, to connecting the dots and finding the different, nexus points, where just by simply, putting the right people in touch with each other, that somehow the energy and the consciousness can expand. And really appreciating just you continuing to do that, both of you, really. And thank you so much for having me. And I would say that for me right now, the experience is, the kind of opening the capacity for our minds and our hearts and our bodies and our cultures to be deeply at home with one another, given all of our differences. I mean, it's quite wild that we have this kind of international community that seems to have so much in common. Is very inspiring, and it deepens my trust and my faith and my, my commitment as well to our shared enterprise, our mutual awakening, our growing up, our waking up, our showing up. So yes, just to bring closure to the event, I'd like to just invite everybody to sit upright and find, if you will, for just a moment, your sits bones in the seat where you are. You can move a little bit side to side if you would like, and maybe back and forth, and just locate your center. It's a powerful thing to experience gravity, and the way in which the force of gravity is always present. Just experience gravity wherever you can in this moment. This force that keeps us grounded, and in a certain way provides the tension so that we can grow. So experience the pull of gravity, and at the same time, from the base of your spine, allow your attention to move upward. And as your attention moves up your spine from the base, through your low back, through your mid back and your heart center, through the base of your neck, up through your skull and out maybe 6 to 8 inches above, just for a moment, experience the quality of your aspiration. Gravity is grounding and applying pressure, and the part of you that continues to grow and expand is miraculously moving upwards and finding stability in that polarity, as Sean mentioned, of gravity and of eros. And as you allow the mind to become still, be in awe of your own breath. The rhythm of the inhalation and the exhalation. And the way in which the density of our bodies and the expansive subtlety of our mind is mediated by the subtlety of the breath. And the miraculousness of the inhalation and the exhalation. And the way in which duality becomes more subtle as we breathe. Where does the in-breath begin? Where does the exhalation? We can begin to glimpse oneness with the breath. the boundary between what is inside and what is outside becomes more permeable, more easeful. And as you begin to enjoy the stability of the body and the harmony of the breath, we can bring our attention to the open space of mind. The image of the sky is often used to identify with mind itself. Allowing our thinking, our language, our memory, images in the mind to be like weather that are moving through. Noticing again how the density of the body becomes finer with the breath, becomes more subtle still in the mind. And taking the backward step to identify with mind itself. Whereas Ken says there's no boundary. No beginning and no end. And no difference between you and me. No difference between here and there or us and them. And as you feel this ever-present and unconditioned nature, allow yourself to follow Terry Patton's instruction and just settle into the place where heart and mind are also one. And the profound intelligence of the heart instills gratitude, appreciation, and tremendous love for the preciousness of this event, all the people who brought it into being, and for this very, very sublime and miraculous moment that we're in. And may all of the good work and the good experiences that came from this moment be dedicated to the awakening and to the well-being of all beings. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Sean. Love you both.
Thank you, Marcelo.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Que é isso, né, pessoal?
I think that's about it. It was very moving, very touching. So we're just closing our meeting. And I would like to appreciate all of you that worked with us in this meeting. I want to be thankful to all the integral community here in Brazil, to all the speakers, our partners, all the sponsors. And I would like to invite Marcelo Cardoso for a final speech as president of Integral Institute Brazil.
Eu prefiro ficar com a não palavra.
I would like to stay with the no word. I think that we talk a lot and that we might bring forward our connection with our hearts, our minds, that we want to move forward with that. I want to appreciate you as well to be able to hold this space for us. So an excellent evening to everyone, and we'll see you soon.